The first time we meet Luis Lopez isn't behind the velvet ropes of Maisonette 9, the most exclusive club in Liberty City that he works at. It isn't during a tense drug deal in Northwood with old friends or in one of Yusuf Amir's absurdly high-stakes stunts. We don't meet him on top. Instead,
none of you smooth! Get on the floor! None of you is gonna get a medal for playing hero. All you're gonna get is a bullet to the heart!
We meet him face down on the floor. Luis enters the story as a hostage in the Bank of Liberty heist, face down on cold marble, unarmed, and surrounded by panic. The men behind the robbery, Nico Bellic, Packy McCreary, and Derek McCreary. And in a strange way, that moment, silent, powerless, forced to keep his head down, echoes throughout Luis's entire story. Luis is always in the middle of someone else's mess, always holding his breath while trying to hold everything together. That balance defines his life. On one side, there's Anthony Gay Tony Prince, his boss, his business partner, and in many ways the closest thing he's had to a father. But Tony is unraveling. He's deep in debt to dangerous people, hiding problems from Luis and numbing his anxiety with pills and cocaine. Luis works around the clock to keep their world standing, running clubs, smoothing over debts, fending off threats, but the harder he works, the more Tony slips. And then on the other side, there's the past that Luis never truly left behind. Armando and Enrique.
It's nice to see you, Mr. Big Shot. Real nice to see you. Captain Downtown. Come up here to talk down to his old friends?
Yeah, I just care about you guys, okay?
I don't have a choice, man. My right-hand man got a single-digit IQ.
Friends from the streets that feel abandoned. They see Luis as someone who's sold out, who traded the block for the bottle service. They mock him, push him away, accuse him of forgetting where he came from. But Luis never turned his back on them. He still checks in, still offers help, still hopes they find a better path, because he knows how close he came to never getting out himself. The clash of these two worlds, his past on the streets and the high-stakes chaos of clubland, creates a unique pressure point. Danger doesn't just follow Luis, it meets him in the middle. From corners and alleyways to penthouses and private jets, it's all the same fight wearing a different suit. And that's what makes Luis Lopez so compelling. He's not just navigating Liberty City, he's surviving it from both ends, trying to protect the people he loves while walking a tightrope between who he was and who he's trying to be. Luis doesn't want to rule Liberty City. He doesn't want revenge or power. He just wants to protect the few people he has left. Even as Tony spirals, even as his old friends drift, even as the violence escalates and the weight of it all starts to bury him, Luis stays, loyal, unshaken, and yet despite how chaotic his life becomes, despite the betrayals, the pressure, the violence, Luis still sees it all as a step up, because for him, it is better. It's a life he was never supposed to have. And to understand that, to truly grasp who Luis is and why loyalty defines him so strongly, we have to start at the beginning, back before the clubs, before the suits, before the guilt.
How many days a week you work those corners?
You can't be sitting here, man, watching them. Any fool policeman on the second day on the job will know you're the guy with the shit, man. You'll wind up back inside, you moron.
Long before the flashy suits and penthouses and the name on the guest list, Luis Lopez was just another kid from Northwood, caught in a cycle that gave most people two ways out, a grave or a cell. Born and raised on Frankfort Avenue in Algonquin, Luis grew up fast. His father was a U.S. Marine who had walked out on the family while he was still young, leaving his mother Adriana to raise 3 kids alone: Luis, his older brother Ernesto, and younger sister Leta. Luis would quickly become the center of his family, especially after his siblings moved out of Liberty City, but long before he carried the weight of his mother's bills, he carried the weight of the streets, an environment fueled by drugs, violence, and the camaraderie of his friends and neighbors that faced the same day-to-day struggles. Northwood was a battlefield dressed in concrete, run by kids barely older than Luis himself. And together they all ushered in a new generation of Dominican youth heavily involved in drug dealing, long before any of them were old enough to legally drink. It was during this time period Luis would come to meet Armando Torres and Enrique Bardas. The two of them would come to be Luis's closest friends, and the trio together soaked up the rules of survival their neighborhood ran off of. Luis back then was described as a thin kid, but still rough around the edges, who in his downtime would find moments to rap over Enrique's beats and get laughed at for it. Through the description of his physical appearance and rough demeanor, Luis's hardship was clearly shaping him into the person we'd soon know. And despite the distractions he'd find with his friends, it was quite evident he was much more observant and goal-oriented than those around him. He'd recall having a looming sense of hitting a wall, with nowhere else to go from fighting over dilapidated buildings and a community already struggling to make ends meet as it was. Eventually, the violence surrounding Luis wasn't just background noise. It became the rhythm of everyday life. He was raised around people who were willing to fight, kill, and even die for what they believed was owed to them, for territory, for respect, for survival. But for Luis, the trouble he'd find himself in was different. What mattered most to him wasn't power or pride, it was the people he cared about most. And when danger came close to them, Luis never hesitated to put himself in its path. At just 17 years old, he'd catch his first major charge. He shot and seriously injured a teacher who allegedly molested his sister. It was not something that appeared to be overly violent, but for Luis, it was instinct. A brutal form of justice in a world that rarely offered any. The system gave him just 2 years in juvenile hall, but what was really handed to him was a label, a mark that would follow him into adulthood, and more importantly, it became the first turn of the revolving door that would define his early life. Not long after his first arrest, Luis was arrested again. This time it was for grand theft auto, but those close to him knew the truth. Luis wasn't the one behind the wheel. It was Armando and Enrique, his lifelong friends who were more like brothers. And Luis, always loyal to the bone, would take the fall for them. He served time for a crime he didn't commit because protecting them meant more than protecting himself. While he would never resentfully throw it in their face or use it against them out of hate, he would use it in the future as a reminder that he's frustrated with them. Not because they let him take the fall for something they did, but because they couldn't see or want more for themselves. They were still stuck selling dope on these corners. But for the grand theft auto charge, Luis would spend another 2 years locked up in prison. During that time, he changed. He bulked up, not for vanity, but for survival. Muscle became armor in a place where weakness was currency. When he got out, he was no longer the scrawny kid with the quick temper. He was quieter, sharper, hardened. But as if prison wasn't difficult as it was, when Luis was released, he wasn't released to a home welcoming or a situation that allowed him to kick his feet up. While he was gone, serving his time in prison, Luis's siblings had both left Liberty City to start their own lives. And by the time Luis returned, he wasn't just a former inmate trying to rebuild his own personal life, he was now his mother's only support, shouldering responsibility while still surrounded by the ghosts of his past. But instead of falling back into drug dealing or the same crowd he ran with before, as easy or as tempting as that might have been for someone who's not only trying to pick up pieces in their own personal life, but be someone else's support system, Luis would come to cut ties with nearly every Dominican gang connection he once had. The only ones he kept close were Armando and Enrique. The bond was still there, built in childhood, tested in blood, but no one could deny that things had changed. Luis had changed. He wanted more. And the life they were still clinging on to, the life that Armando and Enrique were still fully involved in, felt like a chain that Luis was finally ready to be broken from. As I said, he didn't resent them for staying behind, but he couldn't follow them back either. Because even if he didn't know what the future held for him, Luis was finally starting to believe he was meant for something more than just dying over street corners and petty pride. And so he was left at this crossroads. While his mentality was changing, he still had to make ends meet one way or another. So instead of going back to selling drugs, he instead opted to becoming involved in an underground fighting scene for money to help his mother. In the scene, Luis wasn't just making ends meet, he was thriving in the only way he knew how. He was good at what he did. He'd come to be respected and well known in the underground fighting scene. With the money he made, he took care of the person who mattered most to him, his mother. But even that came with pain. Despite paying the bills, keeping the lights on, and doing everything he could to make sure she never went without, Luis was never met with the gratitude he hoped for, or even the bare minimum of a thank you. Instead, his mother greeted his efforts with scorn. She'd call him names, accuse him of being just like his father, the same man who abandoned them, and even went so far as to remove photos of him from the house. As one loan shark during a particular crew exchange summed it up perfectly.
Luis, this is Mr. Santos.
What's going on?
Hey, I guess I didn't recognize you from your mom not having any pictures of you up on the walls.
Yeah, I guess she doesn't have any up.
Now you mention it, I guess mugshots don't sit along too well with graduation shots.
Hey, who the fuck are you?
And the worst part of all of that, Luis understood it. He knew his mother was ashamed, knew she wanted better for him, wanted him to go to college, graduate, not a man with blood on his hands. But that knowledge didn't make the words hurt less. If anything, they dug even deeper. Because no matter how violent, jaded, or cold Luis may have become on the surface, his mother still meant everything to him. It's a painful contradiction. It's a bond built on love, strained by disappointment. She hated the life he led, but never turned down the money that came with it, and Luis in turn carried the weight of that hypocrisy. During one emotional moment, he even asks if she's so ashamed of him, why not ask one of the other kids she's so proud of to cover the bills?
I mean, but you got it all wrong. I mean, it's not like that anymore, you know? I know good people, I know bad people, you know, but I know the difference. I mean, I know I made mistakes, but things are better now. I mean, how many times we gotta go over this?
If things are better now, then why are you always like this?
But you take the money, right? You take the fucking money every time.
Get out of my house! What choice do I have? I lost my job!
Yeah, well, call one of your other kids, the one you ain't ashamed of.
But that was never really an option, because despite all the bitterness, all the resentment that simmered just beneath the surface, Luis kept showing up. He kept paying, he kept trying, even when it wasn't enough. Because he wasn't just trying to prove something to her, he was trying to redeem himself in her eyes. And for a man who never really believed in forgiveness, that silent plea for approval has got to be a lot. For all the money Luis earned, all the muscle he built, and all the fear he commanded, he still felt like a disappointment in the one place it mattered most. No matter how hard he tried, he couldn't buy respect at home. He couldn't shake the feeling that he was nothing more than the son of a ghost and the shame of a woman who wanted better than what life and he had given her. Ultimately, the poor guy was stuck, caught between trying to be the man the world expected and the son his mother wished she had, carrying a reputation he didn't always want and a loyalty to people who didn't always return it. And for a while, that's all life was, a series of contradictions, no peace, no direction, just movement. That was until he met Tony.
Hey, you saved me, man. Made me. Gay Tony will always be the king of this town. You are this town.
When Luis Lopez met Anthony Gay Tony Prince, it wasn't just another job. To Luis, it was a turning point, a lifeline, a chance at something better. Now keep in mind, Luis was fresh out of prison, with the past weighed down by violence, loyalty to the wrong people, and the kind of choices that carved deep scars. Some seen, most not. His reputation was muscle, his future was a question mark, but Tony saw something else. Now, at first, Tony just saw a tough kid who looked intimidating, enough to work the door at Hercules, his other popular club. Someone to make trouble go away, someone too quiet to ask questions, but that wasn't who Luis really was, and Tony would learn that very quickly. In the chaos of Liberty City's nightlife, the deals, the overdoses, the artificial charm, Luis never flinched in the face of any of it. He didn't run or shy away, instead, he stayed. And he proved over time that he wasn't just there to throw out drunk celebrities and keep the velvet ropes in order. He was there to keep Tony personally afloat, to catch him when the cocaine wore off and the walls caved in, to take the debts from swallowing them both whole. And somehow, it would all come to work out together. They kept going. They would come to build something. And Tony and Luis's relationship was something that wasn't built on contracts or cash or the sustainability of a particular job. It was built on them two staying afloat, on shared desperation, on trust that no one else had ever given either one of them. Luis never had a real father. Tony, on the other hand, never expected to have a family. But what grew between them was unmistakable, flawed, often unspoken, but undeniably real. It was its own father-son type of relationship, where Luis was grateful for Tony taking a chance on him, who would do his best out of that gratitude to keep Tony from unraveling, falling any deeper into cocaine, pills, bad romances, or anything else that may cause harm to his boss. Eventually, Luis's loyalty and determination to ensure Tony's well-being would grant him a promotion. From doorman at Tony's popular gay club Hercules to Tony's personal bodyguard and business partner. And that is the position Luis and Tony are in during the Ballad of Gay Tony DLC, a relationship that has grown and been tested for 3 years. By the time the DLC starts, Tony's been to rehab at least 5 times now, recovering from cocaine and pills that Luis claims his current boyfriend Evan Moss and alleged friend Gracie Ancelotti got him hooked on. But even the strongest bonds can't carry the weight of bad choices forever. And as the time of the DLC passes, Luis begins to feel all of it. The weight of the debts he didn't create, the weight of the enemies he didn't earn, and what loving a man like family, who unfortunately kept dragging both of them closer to the fire, really demanded out of him. And the DLC kicks off, showing us just how dire the situation has become. That bank heist Luis is caught in the middle of at the beginning of this video, he was out trying to collect cash for Tony. Just a few moments later, when he returns to Tony's apartment, Luis would come face to face with Rocco Pelosi and his uncle Vince. The two of them were Ancelotti enforcers sent to remind Tony the price of his debts. Even though Luis was just at the bank for Tony and the clubs, Tony had a stash of money right there in his apartment that Rocco would take as a collection on the debts Tony owed. While we can go in full details on Rocco's jobs, the bottom line was the circumstances of his jobs involved manipulation, terroristic-like killings, and a growing realization to Tony that he sold his soul to the devil, later admitting even if he had the money to pay off the Ancelottis, they would never let him go. Tony's debt to the Ancelottis and Luis being forced to deal with Rocco was bad as it was, but it really was only scratching the surface. In addition to borrowing money from the Ancelottis, Tony had taken money from Maury Kibbutz, a man who had made some healthy investments in real estate. By contrast, Maury was much better to deal with than the Ancelottis as far as danger was concerned, but Luis still found him just as annoying and as revolting as Rocco. Maury's arrogance, fueled by the money he'd let Tony, made him believe he owned them both. He didn't just act like a creditor, he carried himself like a superior, constantly belittling Luis and treating Tony like a pathetic liability. In a twist, though, that arrogance, that confidence in his dominance over Luis and Tony would eventually come to Luis's benefit. Maury, at one point, would turn the debt into a game, offering Luis a chance to erase what Tony owed by beating him in a triathlon. Luis would win, and just like that, the debt was instantly vanished. But the insult lingered because for Maury, it was never just about the money, it was about the power, about how he never stopped trying to assert it over Luis.
Slightly bigger pussy than you.
We're done, right? I mean, we're squared? You got your cars now, so now I don't have to sit here and listen to your tiny man bullshit.
Sure, Lou, sure, you could go. If you're as dumb as you look.
Ooh. Excuse me?
Clearing the debt with Maury should have felt like a win, a rare break in the chaos, a chance to breathe. But whatever relief it offered was short-lived. Rocco's demands kept coming, and Tony's mental state only spiraled further out of control. What was once a partnership between friends had become a quiet endurance test, with Luis holding everything together while Tony fell apart. Tony's descent wasn't subtle either. There were multiple moments throughout the DLC when he tried to take his own life, not just as an escape from the mounting debts, but in his own words, as a way to quote-unquote free Luis. He believed his death would unburden the one person still standing beside him, and each one of these suicide attempts would coincide whenever things got rougher, more difficult, and there truly felt like there was no way out. The first time, Tony would lock himself in his room, swallowing a fistful of pills while his boyfriend Evan danced carelessly outside the door, completely oblivious. Luis would come to find him just in time, rushing in to Tony's apartment, shutting off the music Evan was dancing to, and dragging Tony out of bed, splashing water on his face to bring him back. When the initial shock wore off, Luis would explode, headbutting Evan for letting things get this bad, and then knocking Tony out cold. Not out of cruelty, but to keep him home and safe, while he took on Rocco's hit list himself. 3 targets, 3 bombs. Luis did what Tony couldn't bring himself to do, and it was an act that not only saved Tony, but kept the jobs towards absolving the debts going. Then came another night. This time, Tony sat with a loaded gun pressed to his head. Everything was collapsing at that point. A diamond deal had gone sideways, costing him another $2 million towards the Ancelottis. His boyfriend Evan had been killed in the crossfire of that deal, and none other than Johnny Klebitz of the Lost MC was the trigger man, and now, on top of all of that, Gracie Ancelotti had been kidnapped. Her kidnapping had nothing to do with Tony or Luis, but Don Giovanni still pinned it on them, making it clear they had to find her, or they'd be the ones to face the consequences. Through it all, Luis never abandoned him, not once. No matter how reckless Tony became, no matter how deep the trouble ran, Luis stayed. Because for all the frustration, the chaos, and near-death spirals, Luis never forgot what Tony gave him, that second chance. And even if Tony couldn't always see it, Luis was still fighting for him and for the life they had built together. Before we continue to the next section, can we just talk about the fear in Luis's eyes when he sees Tony on the verge of ending it all? For someone who often calls himself as greedy, murderous, a psychopath, the desperation of Luis's face in that moment tells a different story. It's raw, gut-wrenching, because beneath all the bravado, all the bullets and business deals, Tony does truly mean everything to him. And the thought of losing him, not to a rival, not in a shootout, but to hopelessness, is almost too much for Luis to bear.
Boy, no. You're right. You're right. You're not the one with the problem. I am.
Tony, what the fuck are you doing?
No, I'm holding you back. I see that now. You're the closest thing I've had to a son. I'm sorry, Luis. I love you.
Tony,
Goodbye.
Tony, come on, man.
Goodbye. I love you.
Fuck!
What are you talking about, T? Things have been bad before, man. Get us out of it. I fight, you plot, together we get out of it.
If there was ever a single event that sent everything spiraling beyond repair, it was the diamond deal. The one that would eventually entangle Nico, Packy, Johnny, and Ray Boccino. But before we get to that, we need to take a step back and look at how Luis genuinely tried, desperately, to find a way out, and undoubtedly he did make progress. While Rocco and the Ancelottis remained Tony's most pressing and dangerous problem, not everyone Luis encountered was there to twist the knife. Some, for a time, looked like they might actually help. The first was Yusuf Amir, a real estate mogul with deep pockets and even deeper eccentricities. Yusuf had a genuine interest in franchising Tony's clubs. He saw potential, saw value, and had the cash to back it up. But with Tony's finances in ruins and his debts dragging them further into the mud, the idea was never properly pursued. Luis, ever loyal, just insisted that it wasn't his call. Tony owned the lion's share of the business. All Luis could do was run the clubs and try to keep the lights on. But to help the overall situation and keep Yusuf as a consistent contact, he would take on work from Yusuf personally, work that brought in the kind of money they desperately needed. And while Yusuf came off as ridiculous, even cartoonish at times,
Don't judge a book by its cover, father. That's what you taught me.
When a book is called guns, drugs, hookers, and no pants, I think I don't need to read it.
Well, Papa, you know, these people, they mean nothing to me. In fact, they're just going. Go, get out. You, Mr. Lewis, take your wife, Mrs. Lewis, and may I say, madame, this is not a very appropriate way for a married woman to dress. I told them many times, father, this is a disrespectful way to dress. Do they listen to me? No, never. And you, by the way, I'll text you in about 1 minute about the tank, okay?
The news tank?
Shh! Go and leave!
a bond between him and Luis would form, one built off of respect, trust, and dependability. And a lot of Yusuf's jobs were just incredibly outlandish, from hijacking prototype military helicopters off of a yacht owned by weapons smugglers, to stealing armed noose vehicles, and even front train cars. Yusuf would send Luis on the most insane high-risk jobs Luis would ever be sent to do, and yet every single time he delivered. In return, Yusuf offered more than just money. He really would become a resource, a powerful one. The other figure, aside from Yusuf, was the far more dangerous Ray Bulgarin. Now, in the main story of Grand Theft Auto 4, to Nico, Bulgarin was a nightmare from another life. But to Luis, he was introduced with far less weight, just another quote-unquote powerful Russian investor. And that Tony was somewhat considering selling Maisonette 9 to him. But Tony being Tony, of course, downplayed what kind of man Bulgarin truly was. A human trafficker, a killer, a man who could erase problems or easily create them. In their initial interaction, Bulgarin would take a liking to Luis and quickly began testing his loyalty. He'd offer him work, promising it would help clean up the mess that Gay Tony's sinking ship was. And while his jobs were very well paying, that's not to say the risk was incredibly high. He'd hire Luis to help eliminate corrupt news officials, and then sent him on another job to assassinate a man by the name of Marquis Ashvili, a wealthy hockey team owner who refused to sell his team to Bulgarin. The jobs encompassed expanding Bulgarin's investments in Liberty City, while he dangled wealth, power, a life without debt, and without Tony's chaos in front of Luis. He told Luis the truth that he already knew, that he was the one constantly cleaning up Tony's disasters, doing the work, taking the risks, that he was the help, and that he could have more if he just walked away. But Luis didn't budge. Not because Bulgarin was wrong, but because Tony had given him more than a job. Tony gave him direction, a purpose, a second chance when no one else would. He'd even tell Bulgarin that while he knows he's cleaning Tony's mess constantly, he still is under his guidance and has yet to find himself in prison, a place he found himself on a fast track to when he was left to his own devices. Luis knew the difference between being someone's errand boy and being someone's partner, and while Tony's decisions often came too late or not at all, Luis stayed, not out of obligation but out of loyalty, out of gratitude. Even if he was constantly thrown into the fire, he knew that loyalty meant to Tony, to the clubs, to the life he was trying to keep together. It's that loyalty, unwavering, painful, and heavy, that makes what follows with the diamond deal all the more tragic. Now, there's never any clear explanation on how Tony got wind of the diamonds or managed to scrape together the $2 million to buy them. All we know is that they were smuggled into Liberty City aboard the cargo ship Platypus, and Tony saw an opportunity, a desperate, high-stakes move to fix his financial woes in one clean shot. But like most things in Tony's orbit, the plan unraveled almost immediately. The deal was ambushed by Johnny Klebitz and the Lost MC. In the chaos, Tony and Luis were separated from Evan, who unfortunately wouldn't make it. Not only was he killed, but he would lose the diamonds to Johnny. It was an enormous blow all round to Tony, dragging him further into the ground. But as we know through the main story, it wouldn't be the end of the diamonds. Tony would later hear whispers of the diamonds being resold at the Libertonian Museum. Furious and grief-stricken, he would send Luis to crash the deal and recover what was stolen from them. Luis would not hesitate. He would reach out immediately to Yusuf Amir, who loaned him the now fully gold prototype military helicopter that Luis had originally stolen during one of his earlier jobs. Thanks to the helicopter, Luis would storm the Libertonian, only kill 1 or 2 people, grab the diamonds, and quickly and successfully escape with the diamonds back in his possession. But things would only grow more tangled with the diamond fiasco. In response to Luis stealing them back, Gracie Ancelotti would soon be kidnapped by Nico Bellic and Packy McCreary under orders from Packy's older brother Gerald, who wanted to use her as leverage in a trade for the same diamonds that Luis had retrieved. The whole city seemed to now be spinning around those cursed gems. But the real twist came with Ray Bolgren. Bolgren, the ruthless human trafficker who had tormented Nico, would now loom over Luis's world when he learned about the diamonds. As it turned out, they had originally belonged to him, stolen by the same cook who intended to sell them to Tony, who didn't know about the diamonds' origins, unknowingly pulling Tony and Luis into a situation far bigger than either of them could even realize. Bolgren didn't see it as a mistake, though. He saw it as betrayal. Rather than instantly reacting or falling into his usual outbursts, he played it smart, though. Still playing the part as an ally, Bolgren would send Luis on a job, instructing him to assist his bodyguard, Timur, and to call him once he arrived at a rooftop location. But it was a trap. When Luis followed the instructions and called Bolgren once on the roof, Bolgren would direct him over to the corner of the same rooftop, where a box was waiting for Luis. Inside was a severed head of the cook who had originally taken the diamonds and had planned to sell them to Tony. Moments later, Bolgren made it clear this was punishment. The diamonds, the deceit, whether intentional or not, it didn't matter. Luis and Tony's fate was sealed. What had started as a gamble to buy back a future had now turned into a death sentence for both of them. Luis had seen dangerous men before, but Bolgren was something else entirely. On that rooftop, when the trap was sprung, he fought his way out through waves of sniper fire, a circling attack helicopter, and a heavily armed vehicle blockade. The power Bolgren commanded wasn't just intimidating, it was suffocating, and Luis knew instantly that they were way in over their heads. Later, when Tony informed him that the Ancelottis demanded they handle the exchange, returning the diamonds in exchange for Gracie's safe release, Luis would be the one to hesitate. Considering he'd seen what Bolgren was capable of, he knew the Russian had laid personal claim to the diamonds and had the firepower to back it up. He'd share with Tony that it might just be smarter to give the diamonds to Bolgren instead, to cut their losses and avoid poking a monster that clearly wanted blood. But Tony didn't see it that way. From his perspective, the Ancelottis had made their position crystal clear. If the diamonds didn't secure Gracie's return, they were as good as dead anyway. In Tony's eyes, Bolgren was the lesser evil. At least with Bolgren, there was still a sliver of a chance to come out alive, whereas with the Ancelottis, their fates were already written. So the pair would go ahead with the deal as far as Tony was concerned. And just like before, though, everything would go to hell. The diamonds never stayed in one place for long. The moment the exchange was set into motion, it was ambushed, this time by Bolgren and his men, leading to a brutal shootout involving Nico, Packy, and everyone caught in the crossfire. The only success of this deal was Gracie's return to Tony and Luis, who wasn't even happy about her return. She wanted Packy and Nico immediately killed, which generated its own problem. Safe return or not, though, Tony and Luis were far from in the clear.
Things are kind of fucked, man. These guys, man. These fucking guys, you never should have brought them in, man.
Tony, bro, I love you, but I should handle this alone.
And now, it's you and me against the world, okay? And if your brains ain't working right, then I'll make the decision for us, okay? It's Bulgari or us.
After Gracie's return, Luis would receive a phone call from Rocco, and the news isn't good. The fallout from everything, the diamond mess, Gracie's kidnapping, and a separate incident with the triads involving a botched liquor license promise has left Tony and Luis in deep trouble. And now, in light of everything, the Don of the Ancelotti family is furious. As if pissing off the Don wasn't bad enough, though, to make matters worse, Bulgarin had reached out personally to Don Ancelotti, demanding the heads of everyone tied to the diamonds. That meant Tony, and that meant Luis. It also meant that the Ancelottis had now sanctioned open hits, with Bulgarin preparing to throw everything he had at them. But Rocco had a different solution entirely. He would ask Luis to meet him privately at the restrooms in Middle Park, of all places. He'd lay out the entire situation before Luis and explain that in the light of everything, while Don Ancelotti and Ray Bulgarin wants Tony and Luis killed, Rocco, on the other hand, has a potential out for Luis. The alternative he presents is to kill Tony, but he wants Luis to be the trigger man. In the event of killing Tony, they'll deliver the body to Bulgarin and the Ancelottis, and in return, Luis would inherit Tony's empire, become the new face of their nightlife operation, backed up by the Ancelotti family. Essentially, Luis would be replacing Tony, while the Ancelottis, Rocco primarily, would be replacing the position Luis originally had next to Tony. It was a clean break of sorts. At least that's the way Rocco was presenting it. To Luis, it would be a bloody promotion, but it would come at the cost of betraying the one person that genuinely offered him a way out from a previous life that seemed to have none. As he began to take all that in, Rocco would add a little more to his persuasion. He would remind Luis that his plan ultimately relied on either Luis or Tony dying and taking whoever's body to the Ancelottis and Bulgarin. Ultimately, to him, he didn't care. He just wanted the business side of the clubs to fall in a new partnership. Who he worked with could have been either Luis or Tony, but he preferred Luis, so that's why he was the one hearing the deal right now. Now, initially, Luis wouldn't take the offer well. At first, he would threaten to kill both Rocco and Vince on the spot, but he holds back. The timing for such a move isn't right, and deep down, he knows how dangerous a wrong move like that could be. Not just for him, but for Tony and, of course, the businesses. So despite his small outburst, the meeting would conclude with Rocco just wanting Luis to think it over. From here, Luis would immediately head straight to Maisonette 9 to inform Tony, but he's already a little late. Rocco and Vince were there, already holding Tony at gunpoint. Unaware of the deal proposed behind his back, Tony would plead with Luis to help talk sense into Rocco and Vince. He rattles off promises that they can revamp the clubs, there's money to be made, the business still has legs, he has money coming in. He begs his partner to help fix it, to help Rocco see reason, but that's when Rocco pushes Luis to tell Tony the truth. The deal is already on the table. One of them has to die.
Things are kind of fucked, man. These guys, man, these fucking guys, you never should have brought them in, man. Now somebody's gotta, you know.
The mix is with us now.
You gotta be fucking kidding me! Times change, Tony. Your brand of charming homosexuality, it's kind of run out of steam. Someone has to pay for what's gone down.
Luis plays along, at least at first. He doesn't hold back. He lets every ounce of frustration pour out. The reckless decisions, the constant lies, the debt, the desperation, how Tony dragged them into this chaos by bringing in the Ancelottis without ever coming to him first. Something he would have never approved of. How all of this, the clubs, the danger, the impossible position they now find themselves all in, was Tony's doing. If he had just said something, maybe it could have been avoided, but now it was too late. There's a heaviness in Luis's voice as he speaks, as if he's trying to convince himself, just as much as everyone else, that this is the only option left. The air is laid thick with tension, and for a moment, it really does feel like this is the end of an era. The end between him and the man that he once looked up to as his father. Rocco, smug and certain that this was the end, would throw Vince's gun into Luis's hand, telling him to do it. End it now before the Russians show up and finish them all off. It was the only move to avoid absolute bloodshed. And for a second, again, it seems like Luis might actually do it. As if he might pull the trigger and walk away from it all. But what happens next says everything about who Luis really is.
Do it!
Sorry. I'm sorry, man.
After all we've been through. Lou!
I'm sorry, D. You was family, man. But it's either you or all of us.
The Russians are coming, man! We don't got time for this gay shit!
Fucking pop them already!
Tony stares in disbelief. Luis had made his choice. He chose loyalty. The room is frozen in silence as Luis turns the gun on Rocco. For a split second, it feels like the end of everything, but Tony, still reeling from what almost happened, would stop him. He'd remind him that Rocco's a made man. Killing him would invite a war they just couldn't win or hope to escape from. So Tony opts to spare him. It's not out of compassion though, but as a final gesture to the Don, a move of survival, not mercy. As Rocco leaves and what's left behind is the wreckage of trust, the heaviness of nearly crossing a line they couldn't return from. Luis chose to stay, but not because things are easy, but because in the end, Tony is family. And family, real family, isn't about who's right, it's about who shows up when everything goes wrong. Now in the moment, Tony doesn't see it that way. Fair point considering his best friend just pointed a gun at him. But now isn't the time to work out the finer details of what the two of them do from here. Because as they're still collecting themselves and trying to figure out what comes next, the Maisonette 9 is ambushed. Waves of Russian hitmen flood through the doors. Automatic fire cuts through the neon haze, demanding their immediate attention. Now is not the time to continue fighting between father and son, but rather for the two of them to hunker down and fight side by side, at least for one final time. Now, of course, between the two of them, Luis is the one who picks up the weight, the majority of it. He's the protector after all, the one who's always left to clean up the mess. He tears through the club, clearing out every single corridor, every stairwell, every street corner outside, making damn sure Tony survives. That they both do. And when the last of them falls, when the echoes of gunfire finally fade and the music is long gone, Luis finds himself once again standing in the silence, alone with the burden. But Tony himself has already made up his mind. He's packing, broken, embarrassed, ready to leave Liberty City behind. After everything, the clubs, the debts, the near-death moments, he's done. To him, the writing is long on the wall, and his best friend just nearly killed him. The city wants them both dead, and maybe this was exactly as Luis said, what he deserves. He'd walk off into the distance, but of course, Luis knew exactly where he was going. The following morning, Luis would find him at his apartment, mid-pack. There's no yelling, no posturing, just raw honesty, and of course, a whole lot of panic, mixed in with the usual dramatics. He would point a gun at Luis, heartbroken and confused as to why his best friend would ever consider pulling the trigger on him, but Luis is oddly honest about it. Now, I always thought he never genuinely considered killing Tony. At least that's how my memory has always served. However, Luis would admit that he really did consider at one point. That pause was a genuine pause. But it wasn't to kill him out of ambition. He didn't want to take the business, but because, as he puts it, Tony had become someone unrecognizable. For him, it was an extremely complicated choice. Yes, survival played an element into it, but the bottom line was Tony was addicted, back on pills, back on cocaine. He was an alcoholic. He was reckless, constantly putting them in deeper holes, making things go from bad to worse, and mentally, emotionally, he was declining. He was falling deeper and deeper into the abyss. By Luis putting a bullet in his head, it wasn't just for his basic survival. In a twisted way, it was to save his friend from falling any deeper. The descent was rapid and far enough. He'd become a shell of the former man Luis looked up to, the person who saved him. And maybe by putting that bullet in his head, he was doing his best to preserve that image of Tony he once had. But that was also it. Luis still believed in that man, in the person that saved him once. And whether if he genuinely considered killing Tony or not, or the complicated reasons or feelings he had behind it, the bottom line was, he stuck by Tony one more time. They were in this together. There was only one thing left to do now. End it. Luis convinces Tony to stay. At first, Tony's ready to fight by his side, guns blazing like they had before, but Luis sees it differently. This isn't just another shootout. This is the end of the road. And deep down, he knows not both of them are walking away from it, especially not if they go into this together. His plan for it all is simple. Bulgarin's power isn't just his connections or reputation, it's his heroin operation. Since Dimitri's death at the hands of Nico, Bulgarin has taken over the trade in Liberty City, stockpiling shipments across the city, and the largest, most prominent stash is being stored in a place that used to be filled of joy, the now abandoned Funland amusement park. Luis is going to head down there and burn it all, hit him where it hurts, destroy his product, take out his right-hand man, Timur, and then go after Bulgarin himself. But he makes it clear to Tony he's doing it alone. He won't say it out loud, but it's obvious that Luis doesn't think he's coming back from this. That's why he asks Tony not to follow, not to play hero, to just lay low for a few hours, to not go to any clubs, don't go to his apartment, don't go anywhere that are remotely familiar spots for him, anywhere someone might come looking for him. Instead, the two of them settle on one last meeting place, the Monoglobe Monument at Meadows Park in Dukes. If Luis doesn't show, then he didn't make it. And if that happens, all he wants for Tony is to disappear. Leave Liberty City behind, vanish somewhere far away. Brazil, anywhere. Start over, to live. And as a final request, he asks one more thing of Tony. To send money to his mom from time to time. Just enough so she's taken care of. And remind her always that her son loved her. It's not a will, it's not entirely a goodbye, it's just a quiet surrender to the possibility of his death. A man tying off the last loose end of a life built on survival, loyalty, and regret. Luis Lopez is heading into a war with no backup, but if this is the end, he wants to make sure that one person who gave him a way out still has the chance to take it, and still make moves guaranteeing that his mother's taken care of in his death. But Luis's final stand doesn't end in tragedy. In fact, the Ballad of Gay Tony DLC closes on a rare moment of poetic justice. Luis would hit the Funland hard, wiping out Bulgarin's heroin supply, successfully killing Timur, and dealing a critical blow to the empire that had been chasing him and Tony for the last couple of days. But the real ending unfolds at France's international airport. Bulgarin, desperate to flee the city, boards a private jet, and thanks to a well-timed favor from Yusuf Amir, swooping in with his golden buzzard attack chopper, Luis makes it there just in time. He storms a plane, kills Bulgarin, and escapes by parachute, diamonds in hand, vengeance fulfilled. And just like that, the long bloody saga of those cursed diamonds finally comes to a close. Well, not entirely. They would slip hands one last time. As Luis is running over to Tony in the park, he bumps into a homeless man, dropping the diamonds, which is then quickly recovered by the homeless man, and they both disappear into the sunset. Although, over the radio, the homeless man that finds it says that he wants to open up a string of bars and clubs in Vice City. So who knows, maybe we'll see and hear more about him in Grand Theft Auto 6. But as for Tony and Luis, there's no dramatic conclusion, no payout, just a cruel joke from the universe. They lost the diamonds, but they're somewhat freed. What follows next is quiet, peaceful. Tony, Luis, and Yusuf would sit together in Meadows Park, away from the chaos, the clubs, the debts, the guns, and for the first time in what feels like forever, the storm has passed. Bulgarin is gone, the business has a future, and Luis, after everything, is still standing. But the question is, what happens after that? That's where the story ends, but with Tony later reappearing in Los Santos during the events of GTA Online, many wonder what became of Luis. Did he stay behind in Liberty City running the clubs while Tony built something new out west? Did he finally get to live his quiet life looking after his mother, keeping Armando and Enrique close? Maybe even reconnecting with what he lost before all the gunfire and glitter? We don't truly know. But what do you think? What do you think happened to Luis Lopez after the credits rolled? In the end, whatever came of him, it's quite obvious Luis Lopez wasn't chasing glory. He wasn't trying to be a king or feared or rich beyond reason. He was just trying to protect the few people who ever gave a damn about him. Tony, his mother, Armando, Enrique, that was always the heart of it. Not the diamonds, not the clubs, not the money. Loyalty, that was his price, and he paid it in full. Through shootouts and betrayal, overdoses, and debt collectors, Luis stood his ground. Not because he had to, but because it was the only thing left that felt right. He was the last man standing in a story where everyone was falling apart. The one who stayed when he could have walked. The one who forgave when it hurt. The one who chose loyalty over everything else. And maybe that's why his story sticks with us, because in a city built on greed and survival, Luis showed us that sometimes the strongest thing you can do is just stay.